Greetings, everyone. Thank you for braving the weather and joining us here. I also want to say hello to the quite many people who decided to stay at their desk. We just looked at the numbers of people online watching, really from Washington and all around the world. But I think any time a cloud comes by and we're sort of talking about weather in a way, the politics of weather, the politics of climate change in a moment, there are quite a number of people here. So thank you very much for coming. I'm Steve Clemens. I direct the American Strategy Program here at the New America Foundation, and I sort of feel I'm wearing my green button. This is my green reset button. Inspired by Hillary, as I understand it. Reinhard just gave this to me to help me feel, what's that Kermit song, I want to be green or I want to feel green. And I am excited about this. Reinhard Bütikofer, who many of you know, is a German member, a Green Party member of the European Parliament, having won his seat this past year. He's the long-term chairman, extremely successful chairman of the party, a very close friend of mine who has been here many times and taught me about serious energy policy and climate policy in ways that I hadn't expected a German Green Party leader to do. Some of you know me, I'm a Nixonian realist. I'm one of these guys that if I don't see results, I really don't believe in the surface noise about something. And Reinhard Bütikofer is one of the few people I've met in this topic area. Dale and others, or some others, who actually talk about ideas that get traction and actually move the policy needle in ways that my friendly critique of the movement often doesn't achieve. And so he has in me a great fan and follower, and we're here with Reinhard. And also Claude Turmes, who is a Luxembourgish member of the European Parliament and the European Greens. He's a member of the Committee on Industry, Research and Energy, as well as the Delegation for Relations with the United States. He's been a member of the European Parliament since 1999, so I guess, Reinhard, he's your senior in this, yes. And prior to that, he was Secretary of Friends of the Earth Europe from 1995 to 97, and a native of Diekirch. I'm sure I just butchered that. He holds a European diploma in environmental sciences and a degree in physical and sports education. Today we're discussing what does Europe expect from Obama at Copenhagen. I'm interested in learning that as well, as I have my doubts about what Barack Obama can deliver at Copenhagen. In fact, I said yesterday, I think it was, CNN or something, asked me what I thought in one of these frivolous comments about Barack Obama's visit to Copenhagen on behalf of Chicago's Olympic bid. And I said it was absolutely brilliant sleight of hand, because Copenhagen is sort of the new Kyoto, where lots of people really don't go to Copenhagen. I mean, they may not even go to Kyoto, but Kyoto is forever in our minds now attached to the climate change movement, European movement. So whenever you mention Kyoto, it has a lot of stuff that comes with it. So going to help Chicago is not only good for the home team, it is in a way a sleight of hand to sort of show that this president is morally, empathetically concerned with what the city will next be hosting, whether he goes with anything he can deliver or not. And I thought it was a brilliant PR move thus far. So we'll see. So without further ado, I haven't asked which of you would like to go first.
I go first.
Reinhard Bütikofer will go first, and then we'll have Claude next, and then I'll look forward to an active discussion with all of you. Reinhard?
Thank you, Steve. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Steve, not knowing that I wanted to use this pun on Copenhagen already blew it. I wanted to apologize first for the ambiguity of the title and explain that even though we sympathize a lot with Obama, when he goes to Copenhagen, even though we're good Democrats, we side with the Spanish royals and root for Madrid, but, well, that's another story. What do Europeans expect from Obama at Copenhagen? Sounds as if my good friend and colleague Claude Turmes and I were stepping up here to be batting for 500 million Europeans. Now, if any of that would be justified at all, I would point out that we do represent the most ardent supporters of an active climate change policy in Europe and a Green New Deal to create low-carbon economies. The Greens after the most recent European election, maybe I should add that just to give you a clue, hold 55 seats in the European Parliament, which is about 7% of all members of the European Parliament. When it comes to climate change and renewable energies and energy efficiency, I guess we can proudly say that we're punching a little above our numerical weight, and a lot of that is the result of work that Claude has done in the past and that he will talk about also after me. Europe has been in the expecting mode with regard to the United States on climate policy for a lot of years. And Europe has grown accustomed to being in expectation mode. I would say, however, that this is not the adequate attitude anymore. We should move beyond that and go into cooperation mode. And the fact that this present administration is basically singing from the same songbook when it comes to climate change issues is a great move forward vis-a-vis the dark 8 years that I believe lasted a little longer than 8 years, because in the final years of the Clinton administration there was not much movement either. But what I take as a good starting point for the discussion on Copenhagen and climate policy is the fact that not anymore the Europeans are the good ones and the Americans are the bad and the ugly ones. We're in a situation where we can pull together. On the other side, I'm not sure that everybody in this town really believes that it's extremely consequential what Europe expects from the United States, and maybe we should be talking about that too. Having said all that, what do we expect? First thing, and I guess this may be controversial, I would expect Obama to come to Copenhagen in December also. I mean, if he finds it worth traveling to make sure that Chicago can be afforded the opportunity of hosting the Olympics in 2016, he should also come when it's about changing the global trajectory with regard to climate policy by 2015, which is the official goal that he and us and others have agreed upon in the past. Obviously, from a domestic point of view, this carries a lot of risk. What can he bring to the table? What can he bring back to the United States after Copenhagen? But I would strongly argue that if eminent leaders like Barack Obama, leaders who are revered throughout Europe for their vision and their credibility, are not willing to risk part of the political capital that they own in order to make sure everybody understands that this is an extremely pressing issue, how can we expect lesser figures to really put in an effort? So I would expect Barack Obama to come to Copenhagen and play an active role, even though it's not probable that the Boxer carry bill that's been introduced today will have been passed, even though the Brown Dog coalition in the Senate will probably not have backed down, even though the Gang of 20 in the Senate may not have bought all the necessary ideas. Second, I expect him to get involved early on in the domestic discussion. There is an obvious attack on every ambitious attempt to move climate policy, and that is and it's the same in this country as in ours, as in other European countries, climate policy is a jobs killer. I would argue, and I think we can argue that from experience, not only from theory, that climate policy can be a jobs booster. And we provide some of the experience with the successes that we've had in the renewables sector over the last couple of years. But I strongly believe that the decisive battle over public opinion is probably the one battle that we should not allow ourselves to lose. And I'm afraid it will be impossible to forge a coalition of all segments that we need to include to really get a good result unless we strongly fight this battle over public opinion. If we can't determine where this is going, I think on the on the government side, we may turn out to be losing. We are, in fact, as I want to put it, in the bottom of the ninth inning with regard to getting moving on climate change, and we can't allow ourselves to kick the can further down the alley, to think that there are more pressing issues, that there are more immediate concerns. Obviously, you can't have climate change policy getting enacted at the same time that you're fighting over health care. But if you let this take a backseat, and if the president doesn't get involved personally in this discussion, I think it will be even harder to get any result. Third, I expect the United States to play an active role in Copenhagen in agreeing on an architecture of a future climate agreement. I don't see any chance of having that agreement in Copenhagen already, but it makes a difference whether we just have a breakdown of international climate diplomacy or whether we can at least agree on an architecture and build on that in the next year. From my point of view, there are 6 points that would have to be included in such an architecture, or that would be at the top of my list. Number one, we should make clear that we're doing climate policy on the basis of climate science. Second, we have to stick to binding international agreements, to binding targets for individual countries. And I'll come back in a minute to a competing proposal about pledge and review approaches that I don't think will give us an opportunity of achieving good results. I think there should be obligations on the side of the developing countries concerning definite improvements over business as usual scenarios. I think we should include a kind of graduation mechanism, because the strict separation, the strict distinction between Annex 1 countries and non-Annex 1 countries is not going to be a good basis for long-term cooperation when you see how developing economies are increasingly playing a role as carbon emitters. And also we should definitely have to include financing structure. The African Union, forgive me alone, is asking for contribution from the industrialized world of $67 billion per year to finance adaptation and mitigation measures. The European Commission has calculated that we would need at least $100 billion per year financing efforts in the developing countries. The United States has so far not been forthcoming in that respect. I think that should be on the table. And finally, we need a review clause because we will most definitely not be able to oblige any country on definite targets in Copenhagen or maybe even thereafter that are up to par with what climate science is asking of us. As I said, I want to say a few words on pledge and review. This is a proposal that's being pushed by the Australians and seems to be gaining a lot of backing from this administration. It basically implies that there are no international agreements of a binding nature, that individual countries pledge their individual goals according to the national legislation that they have, and that there would be a peer review process, possibly, but no binding obligations. I'm afraid this would be a very strong reversal on where we've come since Kyoto, and I must say openly that from a European point of view, this is a non-starter. And I've heard several American climate specialists arguing that, look, you know that we can't deliver, let's say, minus 25% vis-a-vis 1990 by 2020. So be content with what we can bring to the table. I'm saying this bluntly. The European Union cannot take the position that we accept whatever the United States brings to the table, because first, we would destroy science as the basis for international agreements. What other basis would we then have? Second, we would have a backlash in our own business communities. And third, we would destroy whatever credibility we still have with the developing world. So I don't think that we can go for that. I am rather pessimistic with regard to what can be achieved in Copenhagen, but I want to conclude my remarks by saying that the most decisive battle has to be fought and won at home. It's the battle over public opinion. I think it's a battle that has to be won and fought on the fields of economy and national security. I think we don't have bad cards in that game, but the real challenge is whether all our leaders, including Barack Obama, will get involved in that battle, and only on the basis of that is there any opportunity, any chance of getting a result that would help the global efforts at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reinhard. Claude.
Thank you. So I think Reinhard has stick out a bit the international dimension of the Copenhagen deal. What I will do is, as one of the engineers of our homework we did last year on what we call the climate package, I will give you some insight on what we did and also why we were successful, especially also this issue of overcoming resistance from certain lobbies and coalition building. I'm coming back from a week in California. It's a bit fresher here, also politically, but it was interesting to see that outside Europe there is also areas, and large areas in California is almost 37 million inhabitants, and I was really impressed by this dynamism between research in Stanford and Berkeley, the venture capitalists, startups in the field of smart grid, renewables, efficiency, and also the very comprehensive legislation which is passed both by Schwarzenegger, the governor, but also by CPUC. So I think it is encouraging to see that there is pockets of progress, huge technological, and I would also say progress in coalition building, because in California there seems to be as wide a support for these policies than in Europe. So what was our homework? We were very much aware in Europe that we had to get ready well ahead of Copenhagen. And that's why in the years 2007 and 2008, after first a meeting of the heads of states where the German Chancellor Merkel played a very important positive role, where we got the big lines on 20% greenhouse gas reductions, 20% energy efficiency, and 20% renewables. We were then, in 2008, concentrating on doing concrete legislation. So we have today in place a cap-and-trade system which goes for the big industry and power companies with full auctioning, 100% auctioning for the power sector, which is important to reduce the windfall profits in that area. We have in place efficiency policy. At this very moment, we are heavily digging into buildings. We have had a vote before summer in the European Parliament to get to net zero energy buildings in Europe for new buildings in the home area and commercial end of 2018. And we are trying to organize huge amount of money for retrofitting of the existing building stock. And our most ambitious policy is clearly the one on renewables. That was the area where I was basically the marquee or the waxman in the European Congress. So I'm quite proud that we were able to get to 20% renewables all over, which means at least 33% in the field of electricity, 18 to 20% in heating and cooling, and 10% in the area of transport. And of course, your first question would be, how were you able to organize these coalitions? In a moment where most governments in Europe are not ruled by center left. So most of the governments in Europe are ruled by center right. Even in the European Parliament, we have, when you look to the sheer figures, we have a center-right majority. But nevertheless, on policy like renewables, we have such a broad support in our citizens, but also more and more in industry. I give you one or two figures. Steel. With the policy we have decided on renewables, there will be a bigger market for steel, for wind turbines, than for cars in Europe. So basically what I have done is created the single largest market for steel companies in Europe. And second, we see in all the countries where we have had a very quick wind penetration, a very interesting effect. What's happening when the wind blows in Germany? What's happening when the wind blows in Spain? What happens when the wind blows in Denmark? The prices of electricity go down. So you would say this guy is completely out of science and academics. It is the academics who tell us this. Because when you have a lot of wind, you need much less of the old coal power plants. And on the liberalized markets and wholesale markets, which you also have, wind has very low marginal costs, so it gets into the market and it kicks basically out all the most expensive, and with that you get reductions. Subsidies, so-called support for renewables in a country like Germany is of course several billion of euro. But the sheer effect of this merit order on the electricity prices is a factor 1.5 to 2 bigger than all the support which goes to renewables. And that explains that we have even the support of the energy-intensive industry, at least for the renewable policy we do in Europe. On efficiency, buildings is of course an area where we have sat down with the construction industry, with the trade unions. Buildings is a huge area for job creation, and very important to understand, our dependency on Russia and the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Of course, we can build the one or other pipeline, Nabucco being the most important, but acting on buildings, more than 50% of our gas is in the building stock. So doing proactive retrofitting is basically giving us a higher independence to Russia, and in that sense raising the the energy security. The other aspect on efficiency is that in most of the energy-intensive industry today, the costs for resources and energy are 60-70%, the costs of labor are 30-40%. So after 40 years of McKinsey, PwC and others helping the industry to save, to do cost cuttings and to be competitive at a global scale on labor and reorganization of labor, it's absolutely clear that the next big business for consultancies is going into production lines of steel, of cement, of small and medium enterprises, and looking where you can cut costs on energy, on water, on resources. And that is, again, good for the costs. It's reducing the volatility on markets which have seen very high price peaks, and it is also reducing our geopolitical dependence in Europe on imports of certain raw materials. So basically, the success story of this climate package is a success story which is linked to what Reinhard also announced, that what we as Green Party have campaigned during the recent elections, which is a Green New Deal. So it is about a gradual restructuring and greening of the economy, which gives us, of course, much broader support in our populations than the sheer argument and urgency of environmental policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claude. Thank you. Thanks to both of you. Let me open the floor in just a moment, but let me ask before we get there and before we talk about expectations of Obama, let me broaden the picture for just a moment and ask, and Reinhard, I just came back from, well, I feel like I've been spending all year just coming back from China because I've been to China about 4 times in the last 12 months, but I visited a very large natural gas power plant outside of Beijing that was supplying a lot of Beijing. It was brilliant. It had great productivity. It was clean and fairly impressive. Very expensive when you compared it to many of the options. But you did see China making this investment, sort of a showcase plant. I'm sure they run. I know they took Hillary Clinton there. But when you look at the coal realities in China and you look at what's going on, my question to you is, what do you expect from China in Copenhagen in terms of really dealing with climate and emissions issues? China is now the world's greatest emitter. It has, in the middle of this financial and economic crisis, taken a coupon approach of allowing people, particularly in the West and undeveloped parts of China, to buy all sorts of appliances. It's had a massive energy surge. So while the rest of the world has declined in emissions, China has actually increased dramatically. So I'm wondering, beyond Barack, what do you expect from who?
First of all, I think at the G20 meeting recently in Pittsburgh, who upstaged Barack by announcing new moves that Barack was not able to announce from his part. I see the Chinese probably being more eager to move than other threshold economies.
i.e. India?
i.e. India or Brazil or others, because they have analyzed the situation and have come up with a very threatening and simple expectation. China is probably going to be one of the very big losers of climate change if they can't help stopping it. So they have reasons of their own to do a lot about it. Having said that, I think it's a fair expectation that countries like China should pledge measurable, reportable, and verifiable action with regard to staying below BAU scenarios. I can't give you a specific percentage here, somewhere between 10 and 30. That's what I think they could be expected to do, but only under a very clear precondition, 2 clear preconditions. If the industrialized countries don't move on their part, taking individual responsibilities and pledging that they will achieve definite reduction of their CO2 emissions, and if the West is not willing to provide financing for adaptation and tech transfer, I don't see the newly emerging giants like China and India taking the lead.
Claude, did you want to comment?
It is absolutely right to blame the Chinese government for what it did between 1998 and 2005. And when you go to the statistics, and I was with Chris Levine from Berkeley, who is probably the Western person who has most insight to Chinese energy policy. He is at Lawrence Berkeley. And so the energy intensity of China was no economy never had done better between 1990 and end of the 90s. And then Chris Levin, he says, Reagan came to China in the way they deregulated almost all of their standards, and they allowed this craziness of the beginning 2000, which then produced enormous amount of coal power plants. They have left this policy. So the 5 years program, which is enacted since 2006, shows again results. They are back to more than 3.5% of energy intensity gain, which again I would be completely happy if EU and even more US would be able to achieve this. And all my talks with European renewable energy people, which are today the best in the world, is if they are afraid of one issue, it is that the Chinese will outcompete them. China has today 80 companies building wind turbines. They have learned to go up from very little wind turbines to more than 3 megawatt in only 5 years. Europe companies, which are the world leaders, took 25 years to do this. China is number one on PV already today. China will be number one on electric cars, and so on and so on. So it is absolutely wrong to think that it is China who is standing in the deal. And all your discussions you have and we have in Europe on dirty steel imports to Europe or to US, there is very well researched academic data who show that the steel who is exported to US and Europe is less carbon intensive than the European steel making, and much, much less carbon intensive than your old steelworks you have in US. So please, on China, go to the figures and don't blame them just out of the blue for doing some more or less dishonest policies.
Interesting, thank you. Let me open the floor. And we're going to run a microphone over to you if you'll identify yourself and
Thank you.
move on. Yes.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark Sanchez from the European Commission delegation in the United States.
So where were they wrong?
Well, I can't say so.
Yeah.
But
You can dare.
the thing is that in here in the United States, everyone thinks that Copenhagen is going to be a great deal after the healthcare bill for both the House and the Senate. And the thing is that there's a question arising sometimes in this kind of forum, which is, why not delay in Copenhagen? Now, I perfectly understand the argument from Europeans, I'm European, saying that the whole world cannot just stand and wait for the United States to resolve this domestic problem. But at the same time, you got to be realistic. And United States' role is as crucial as every other countries in this game. So the thing is that there are two reasons why I think it should be delayed. I know. I mean, again, I'm speaking on my behalf, not on the European Commission. But first of all, is that it's going to be very tough to convince the public opinion in the United States that a great effort has to be made on that side after the health care. And I think the second thing is that it's going to be as difficult to convince the developing countries that, let's say, we're not going to help them financially at this point of the history, because I think it's like the worst year to try to finance this anyway. Thank you.
So the question is, are we being unrealistic, Reinhard? I heard a lot of realism in your talk, but how do you see this question?
Let me give you a very pragmatic answer. The turnaround point where we should have peaked, if you go by the climate science, should be in 2015. Now, we don't have ample time before 2015. If you propose postponing Copenhagen, how long do you want to postpone it? If it's not in the end of 2009, it's not going to be in the end of 2010 because that would be right after the midterm elections. Nobody will be in a position to negotiate such a complicated deal during campaigning time. As things stand, Democrats stand, well, probably to lose some of the control they have in the House during the midterm elections. How much I can't foretell, but they are certainly not going to win in strength. So by postponing a move now, you would be in the year 2011 with a House and a Senate maybe that is even less interested in moving on these issues than the present Senate and the present House are. What use would that be?
Yes, Lee Diamond.
Thanks. My name's Lee Diamond. I do have some reactions, but there would be more to talk with you one-on-one. And so I'd like to bring up the policy options, which are obviously cap and trade. Another one, which has been discussed, but it seems to me would be simpler, would be a carbon tax. And then another one is if we don't get a bill, that the president use the EPA to pursue something that the Supreme Court has said the EPA, I think, has the power to do, which is to require mandatory reductions in CO2 levels. So I guess my question for you guys, and I don't know if Steve may want to comment on this in the domestic context, but understanding how this works, having done it for some time, are all of them practical? Would they all work? And would, in particular, since the president has the power on the CO2, how would that work? And then one other thing I want to mention is an article in Politico today about what's happening in the corporate sector and how irresponsible the corporate sector is. But there are some companies, energy companies out west in particular, that are leaving the Chamber of Commerce, and Nike's under pressure from responsible shareholders. There's a sentence in here that's summarizing somebody who's a spokesman of the Chamber of Commerce. It says the Chamber of Commerce says it's not opposed to tackling global warming, but it fears any legislation that could raise costs for business. So that sounds to me like a strict cost-benefit analysis. Does that make sense? I mean, can we change the picture here?
Got it.
Yep.
Strictly on a cost-benefit analysis
Got it.
basis?
Thank you.
Yep.
Reinhard.
Well, I leave the carbon tax to Claude. Two comments, one on EPA. I would be reluctant to say, well, let EPA do it. EPA, if they want to do anything, need political cover.
That's right.
And there have already been attempts to take the authority away from EPA under which it could do anything at all. And I would expect future attempts to repeat that. I don't know how long this will be a futile attempt if there is no strong political cover from the administration and from the Hill. So I think EPA can only work within a political environment, but it cannot step in instead of political leaders to sort of treat that as if it were a merely technical thing that can be dealt with a technical approach. Second, the business sector. This is certainly reason for cautious optimism. There have been similar voices in Europe, maybe not as strong as some of the voices over here, because in our case, the state has been much more active on climate policy than in the United States. So businesses have not been under such a necessity to act themselves because they were not content with what the government did. But there has been a study commissioned by the German Federation of Industry 2 years ago as to the cost of reducing CO2 emissions by 30% by 2020. And they came up with the result that if they reduce CO2 emissions by 30%, it would have a net gain. The cost would be offset by economic gains. So only if you go beyond 30% would there be at all a cost to the economy. That was not what the Federation of Industry expected. But it's been done not by a green consultancy, but by someone with good conservative credentials. And I think these facts can be used to win over part of the business community. And as Claude said and as I said, I think that's part of the decisive front in this battle, whether we can have an alliance with at least parts of the business community to support us on that.
Claude, do you want to talk about cap and trade versus carbon tax?
Yeah, and I can just add one sentence on this issue of chambers of commerce or all kinds of spokes organizations of business. The problem is they are often not very representative. So and I think the whole debate now in US is that the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce is a coal guy. And I can fully understand that Duke Energy and others, they have, of course, if going ahead on climate change will be bad for coal, and it will be good for gas, it will be good for renewables, it will be good for all the electricity companies and all the building construction materials. So it is very natural that there is tensions in these organizations and that there is a certain abuse of power by some of those who are leading these organizations. We have the same problem in Europe. They have recently rebranded to call themselves Business Europe. I often call them Dirty Business Europe because when you look to their statements, it is really only the old industry which are the most polluting but also the most vocal. And that's not the reality anymore of business, at least in Europe. On the issue of carbon tax, first what you have to understand, Europe had in 91, so in the up-run to the Rio conference, a proposal for an energy tax. That was at that time defeated by a veto from Margaret Thatcher. And since we are no more 12, at that time we were 12, now we are 27, we can't introduce politically, basically, a carbon or an energy tax at European level because the decision on tax issues is in unanimity. And so, therefore, basically, the civil servants of the European Commission came up with the idea of a cap and trade system, which is then under internal market rules where we have qualified majority. So I think the first what you have to understand, the fact that Europe went to cap and trade, the first mover for it was a purely institutional move. Second, a carbon tax or an energy tax, which I prefer, has much less volatility. And in that sense, it gives a much clearer signal for the business community, for the financial community. Having said that, a cap and trade says, what is good about cap and trade? The cap is good because you create an absolute cap, and climate change is about capping the absolute volumes of CO2. And in that sense, if the cap is well done and progressively going down, that is really driving climate policy on a scientific basis. The second issue is then, of course, the volatility of a cap-and-trade system. I can understand these discussions about an upper floor, but I would then also urge you to have a lower floor. So, and then to move these gradually up. That would make sense. And third, you have to understand that all academic research done on the effect of carbon taxes, energy taxes, and cap and trade tell you the following. It is not the price signal, so that energy is a bit more expensive, that really makes a difference. The difference comes from where do you put the money which you recycle to the economy. So if you get 100 billion from a cap and trade or 50 billion from the cap and trade, the effect comes not from raising this money, but the effect comes from the redistribution of this money. So if you redistribute this to the right renewable technologies, to the right efficiency technologies, plus we in Europe use some of the cap and trade money to help the combat energy poverty and to overcome some of hardship in certain industries. So, again, the importance in all the discussions now in the Senate on cap and trade is you have to keep it for the cap, and because it is if you don't keep it, you will not have any money, neither to compensate social hardness nor to compensate for or to speed up innovation on efficiency and on renewables.
Thank you. Let me just ask you one bit on Claude about. I've been meeting with some industry groups, manufacturing groups, and others that do fear an energy order, whatever it may be, cap and trade or something of the sort, where you don't deal on the trade side with defectors from that system in other countries. Is it important to eventually to get the allies that Reinhard was just talking about to actually open our minds a bit about this concern about a run out of other manufacturing sectors that has to exist in one regulatory energy climate change environment, but can even take China out of it, but other platforms in the world that don't do that? I think it's important, and I don't think you will get allies, and I actually don't think that you will win in the United States unless that debate is reopened. But it's also an ideologically, demanding discussion.
I think what we learned, that's both, I think, Reinhard's history and mine, is when the Greens started in the 80s and in the beginning of the 90s, we were not sorrowful enough on restructuring issues. So we need, and that's something which we are now doing proactively. We sit down with trade unions and we say, look, we know that we will lose jobs in the car industry. So how do we organize this? That so retraining and schemes. And this is true. So this whole climate issue is about a restructuring of industrial policy. And this must also have a social dimension in the sense of not just deciding the climate side, but also having thought through the 8 or 10 years of transition. That is extremely important.
I think you were also alluding to the border adjustment discussion.
Right, border adjustment, yes.
And
which I think is becoming a bigger issue here.
I guess Claude is more a fan of that than I would be, but there are at least, well, first of all, I agree that we cannot just ignore the issue. If some of our industries are under heavy international competition, if they are energy intensive, if they have no other way of producing the products that they sell, then we have to help them in one way or another. With regard to the border adjustments, I'm a little bit skeptical from a political point of view. Going to Copenhagen and telling the developing countries that, look, we're not going to put on the table what you expected, but guess what? We're threatening you with border adjustments. How do you like that? I'm not sure that will really seal the deal. So from a political point of view, you have to make sure that what you think would be necessary to win over some of your local and national players doesn't come into your way when it's about having an international coalition. But clearly, either you have to exempt some of the industries from the trading mechanisms, or you have to do border adjustments. Some of the industry would like both.
So it'll be mixed, basically.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yes, right here.
I'm Brian Beery from Europolitics. It's more of a short-term question, really. Going into Copenhagen, how important is it to have a Senate bill passed in advance of Copenhagen?
There's not going to be a Senate bill.
So is it unimportant?
No, it's really a tricky question, because on the one hand, I think all the other actors which will be in Copenhagen at the table, they haven't forgotten the Kyoto story. So basically, a president coming at that time, Clinton or Al Gore, and then being at the table, negotiating the issue down or to some advantages for his country, and then afterwards not being able or not being willing to pass it. And in that sense, the fact that US has not done its homework before Copenhagen is, of course, not good for the process, and also the trust building before this important conference.
From our point of view, it's not about process; it's about credibility. The United States just is not able to make up for several years of laziness within just not even 1 year of a new administration. That's impossible. The United States cannot achieve a CO2 reduction of between 25 and 40% vis-a-vis the 1990 levels by 2020 under the existing circumstances. So the question is the United States able to make everybody understand that they're doing whatever they can to catch up? And in that sense, of course, a Senate bill would help, because it shows that even though the plate is full and even though there are high priorities on the national agenda,
it also is high.
It still is being given also some priority. Of course, that would help. But if the president cannot boast of having a Senate bill by early December, there are other ways of reassuring the partners that the United States are going to be ambitious.
You know, Reinhard, earlier this year, I can't remember whether it was February or whatnot, at the time of what used to be called the Major Emitters Conference.
Yeah.
I don't know what they call it now. The German environmental minister was here. I interviewed him for my blog, The Washington Note. So for those who are interested, you can search it. It's a 5-minute deal. And in that, he said it was going to be important. He was confident in President Obama's approach and outline, but it was going to be important at various stages before Copenhagen to make sure the United States was on track to delivering something. And that not delivering, if I recall his comments, would reinforce the doubt around the world about America's seriousness. And is that where we're going to be? Is it going to reinforce, no matter what Barack Obama's team goes with, does it really reinforce the doubt in our ability to move forward?
Even worse than that, I'm afraid. To have this talk now about not doing binding international agreements, but watering it down to pledge and review approaches is really
Counterproductive.
a great disillusionment for us.
Can you repeat that?
Why?
I did, because he's in the press, and I thought it was a good line.
It's
Great disillusionment.
yeah.
Other questions? Yes, right here.
Yes.
Let me get to you the mic. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Alfred Meyer, Friends of Chernobyl Centers, U.S. I have two questions. One is about the science. Well, they both relate to the science. One is 350 parts per million the target we're going for? And do you have any comment on the October 24th International Day of Climate Action in terms of working on public opinion? And secondly, kind of a technical question, but I worry that it's used to obfuscate things. That is, the basis for cutting down carbon, the difference between using 1990 and 2005.
If we can have brief responses. Claude, do you want to take the benchmark, the date benchmarks?
So 350 ppm for those who are less into the subject is, so some really prominent climate researcher like James Hansen from NASA is saying that 450 ppm, which is normally what is the scientific transcription of the political goal of the 2 degrees, that the relationship between different geosystems is worse than what was expected, and that therefore we would have to go to 350 ppm. I think it's not an unrealistic, let's say, so it's probably what close to best science. The problem is that this is even farther away from what we are able to do today politically. So, and that's the reason why we as Greens, so knowing that climate change science may be more skeptical than what is, let's say, in the books for Copenhagen. So we know about this, but still, I think the first move we want to get to is now on the basis of the 450, and of course 90 is that was basically the basis under the Kyoto Agreement, 17% reduction, which is now in the Waxman-Murky, based on the 2005 baseline, means, of course, so when you translate it in 1990s, then it's basically no reduction, which shows the absolutely irresponsible policy which were done over the last 12 or 14 years, basically, in US, where I think, and from an outsider, you have the best researchers. I'm impressed by what's done in Berkeley and Stanford and in other places. And then you have a policy which is so much delinked from this reality, and that is from outside it is really worrying. And in that sense, we are happy that the Obama administration has at least now brought science back as a basis for policy making. And Chu is from Berkeley. A lot of other people are high up in the administration are really people who look first to science and then try, of course, or have also to look what is politically possible.
And one guy who's been raising a lot of this is Senator John Kerry, who regularly references the differences in this gap between 350 and 450 parts per million, and says we still, if we hit our targets, are dealing with devastating environmental consequences. Yes, right here.
Mac Moore with the Rapidan Group. Mr. Termes, you touched on this, but I'm curious as to whether or not the Europeans would find it problematic that the U.S. is pushing, or seems to be pushing in the direction for cost containment more than actual cost containment for carbon and greenhouse gas
You mean
reductions.
The carbon collar? What they call
Exactly.
carbon
So
collar?
not only a
The
price
upper
floor,
floor.
but also
Yeah.
a price ceiling. Right now it's a soft price ceiling, but I think as negotiations go on in the months ahead, that price ceiling could become harder and harder. And that proves not only to be problematic potentially for the future outlook for creating a transatlantic carbon market on the one hand, but then also on the other hand, marginal abatement costs that the IEA foresees to be needed range anywhere from $50 to $200 over the long run. Right now, the price ceiling that's being proposed is about $28, and the downward pressure on that is obviously not good for the IEA estimates. So,
We're nearly running out of time,
okay.
so brief response on the carbon collar, which I don't know
I
anything
think
about.
I understand that for the sheer reason of planning, let's say, of better pricing and not going to volatility, that you can have a theoretical debate about lower floors and upper floors. The problem is that in the political process, you will be pushed then to levels which kill the whole instrument. And that's the problem. The problem is not that you envisage a corridor and even possibilities to hedge, let's say, pricing at certain moments. The problem is that if you are not in a bargaining position to keep the levels up to the ambition, then you kill the instrument.
Let me just, in closing, I want to give the gentleman spend some time. I know there are a lot of friends here, Dale and others, that would like to say hello, but I need to put you on the spot on one thing, just because it's my job. I know that Reinhard Budekoffer is one of the I can tell in your talk, Claude, that you're a pragmatic thinker about these issues as well. Are you, as Green Party members in the European Parliament, compelled in that position to speak against any of the sort of nuclear dimensions, nuclear power, energy dimensions of reaching these targets? Or do you step back from that and realize that the international system is simply going to find a freedom to mix to sort of move forward there? I'd be interested in, what you can share about your personal and or your party positions on the nuclear side of that, which is often sidestepped.
I think we have still very good reasons to be against nuclear. The waste problem has not been solved. The proliferation problem has not been solved. There is still a risk of dramatic accident. And I think we know that terrorism is an issue which wasn't there when nuclear power plants were built. Having said that, I think what we try to do is at the level in Europe where things are decided on nuclear, which is not the European level, but which is the level of the member states to really prevent any nuclear to be built. I'm quite optimistic that that nuclear will not play a big role in climate, also because of the economics and because of the supply chain. So these ideas also from McCain and others that US could build 100 nuclear reactors in the next 15, 20 years. Sorry, have you seen how many nuclear engineers are in the universities in US?
Right. Well, I mean,
There's
Barack
nobody's-
Obama mentioned not the number, but he also talked about nuclear. That's what was interesting to me.
Yeah,
that,
but
yeah.
I think it is no. And what we understand is there might be in the Senate bill a lot of rhetoric about nuclear in order to buy in certain Republicans and certain let's say less easygoing Democrats. But from there to a nuclear investment. Come on, look to the reports from the financial analysts and nuclear power plants. That's a high risk financial investment. And what is different now from 20, 30 years ago when the nuclear power plants were built? We have alternatives, large volume. We have in the North Sea alone more capacity to build up offshore. So we have capacity 150,000 megawatt, 200,000 megawatt over the next 10, 15 years. That is the equivalent of 80 nuclear power plants in power production, but done in an environmental friendly way and, importantly, with much less financial risk also for the power companies.
Thanks so much.
Today, the 1 kilowatt hour from a newly built nuclear plant is already more expensive than 1 kilowatt hour from onshore windmill. And as the renewables industry develops, there's going to be a competition over who crowds out who on the grid. And we are experiencing that holding on to nuclear is already becoming a blocking strategy against the development of renewable energy resources.
Please join me in thanking Claude Termes and Reinhard Budekoffer for a passionate discussion. I should say for those of you online, we will have this posted for those of you watching online. Thank you for joining us as well. We will also be posting this entire discussion on YouTube for further explication and looking at this again. Thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah.
That was great. Thank you. Absolutely great.